In fact, on the walls of Queen's Park, there is inscribed in Latin a maxim, which is Audi alterum partem. Hear the other side. And you cannot be a sincere, committed champion of justice, equality, and fairness and equal opportunity if you don't make the effort to hear out the other side.
You might have heard the expression, there are two sure things in life, death and taxes. But tax law is about a lot more than that. This podcast from the University of Ottawa Tax Law Society has two goals: to help students find careers in tax and to ask questions about the hidden side of tax, from cryptocurrencies and AI to the Pandora Papers, from funding universal minimum incomes to even what tax has to do with your favorite streaming service. As a former journalist and a first-year law student, I don't know much about tax law yet, but I do like when cities are clean and people are healthy, which are two places where tax money goes. This show is for beginners like me and experts like my guests who'll have some answers. Because if there are only two sure things in life, let's at least make sure the tax part is interesting. You might not know that former Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty is a graduate of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. He's better known for the Ontario Greenbelt, eliminating coal, and introducing the HST to Ontario, which came into effect in 2009 and reportedly saves Ontario businesses over $5 billion annually. But in his autobiography, Dalton McGuinty Making a Difference, he writes that he never loved tax law. He preferred criminal law and civil law and enjoyed volunteering with legal aid on campus, dealing with landlord-tenant issues, workplace injuries, and family law. So we'll get to tax, but let's start at the beginning. Fun fact, Mr. McGuinty went to law school in 1978 and got married in his second year. He had to get special permission to skip a criminal justice administration class for the wedding. He also ran for the law school seat on the University Senate and lost, which he says was a great learning experience for his career in politics. Here's Dalton McGuinty.
About 1/3 of my class did not end up practicing law. So I'm going to take the opportunity and offer you some unsolicited advice. And I got this from my Minister of Finance, who said to me, "Premier, you got to relax at the plate." And I kept saying to Greg Sabero, "Greg, what the hell are you talking about? What does that mean?" So he told me that in Major League Baseball, the time it takes for the baseball to leave the pitcher's hand and across the plate is less than half a second. So it's very hard to adjust the swing of your bat. And it turns out that those of us in life who squeeze the bat hard in anticipation of a specific pitch, it tightens up our wrists and our elbows and our shoulders and our backs and our hips and our knees and our ankles, and it's very hard to adjust. So that's why you'll often see professional batters who are, Amie, they're kind of loosey-goosey. They're swinging the bat around, just trying to relax. The moral of the story is you don't know what kind of a pitch life is going to throw you. You need to stay alive to opportunities and to the distinct possibility you're going to end up doing something which you never thought about, for which you're going to be really, really good. I was always going to be a doctor. Then I went to law school. My dad was in politics. I swore when he was alive there was no way I would ever set foot in the political arena. My dad drops dead of a heart attack at the age of 63 shoveling snow. 2 weeks after the funeral, I said to Terry, I said, I think I got to run. She said, because she's always been much wiser than me, "We've got 4 kids under 8. There's no way you're running." I said, that is so sensible. That's so sensible. But for me, Amie, politics was always more an affair of the heart than the head. And so I pursued that. So what I'm saying in a long-winded roundabout way is, yeah, you need to have a plan. You need to have a plan A. So you're going to law school and you're supposed to pursue studies there and you'll be acquainted with all things legal. But I want you to stay open. I want you to stay alive to other possibilities where you could be really, really good and find a fulfilling and meaningful career. That's all I'm saying.
I think a lot of the challenge for a lot of law students who will eventually listen to this podcast is they don't even know the diversity of options. And so the university does expose us to a lot of those. But as you say, you really don't know what's coming and what you could do.
Anybody who brings critical thinking to the table, that is a highly sought after skill in virtually every domain. And maybe that's the important thing that I learned at law school.
And you talk about that 1/3 of your class that's not practicing law. What are they doing now?
Entrepreneurs, writers. Some went on to medical school, engineering, but they brought with them that very specific skill set that I think is most carefully crafted, sharpened, and honed at law school, which is a capacity to pour through reams of information, separate the wheat from the chaff, develop a cogent argument, and at its best, you move people. I never really loved the law, Amie, but I loved what it could do for people.
I hear your passion in your voice. And so I'm wondering, for people who don't necessarily want to be at the front of a party as lawyers working in government, do you have advice for positions or opportunities that they might seek?
Well, the great thing about law is there's so many. We have insinuated ourselves into so much of the social and economic fabric. There's always if you want to go, if you like music, you could pursue law in the music business. If you like cryptocurrency, there's room for lawyers to advise as we build a new ecosystem. If you want to work with an NGO, you can ensure that UNICEF, that the resources being spent by UNICEF are achieving their intended purpose. So don't think inside the box all the time, because there's so many fun opportunities outside the box too.
That's interesting. You mentioned a box because you had articled after you graduated from law school at University of Ottawa at a criminal law firm in the city before opening your own criminal law practice. So I'm wondering, how much was that staying in a box, or was that expanding a box? Like, what were you thinking at the time there? And did that expand later for you naturally?
Well, it was one of the things that, as I like to say, I've never really fell in love with the law itself. It's rather dry and rather esoteric. But I fell in love with what it could do for people. I've always been moved by people, our strengths, our weaknesses, our failings, our shortcomings, our noble aspirations. That's all rolled into, the human species. And from time to time, we need to rely on the law, and we need to rely on a system that transcends culture, tradition, and religion, something that is rock solid, and someplace where we can all go to seek justice and fairness and equality. And to me, that inspires me, and for me to be able to help other people find that in a life where they may be, adrift, I found to be very rewarding.
Whether you were working in criminal law or wills and estates, in tort law that you enjoyed as well?
Absolutely. You can find that. Now, I started off with practicing criminal law, but then, we had 4 kids in 5 years, and it was hard to make a decent income with criminal law at the outset. So I was practicing a lot of legal aid, very much enjoying it. So we expanded my practice. I have 3 younger brothers who became lawyers as well, Amie, and I practiced with some of those. And then as I got closer and closer to a life in politics, I had to wind down my own personal practice and the kind of practice that readily lent itself to more of an arm's length style of practice was wills and estates. So I did that, and then I finally wound up my own practice down completely.
And I think you, at one point, wanted to go into medicine. That's what I read in your book. And as an Ottawa MPP, you helped build a courtroom at the University of Ottawa with one-way mirrors to students so that students could observe court proceedings, like an operating theater in a hospital.
Yes.
So if you could make one big change to how law is traditionally taught, what would that be? Because it seems like that might be where you were headed with that, with that donation.
Yeah, that's a really good conjecture on your part, Amie. I'm really glad I was able to help our law school have the equivalent of an operating room theater built there, because I think the distance between law school and the practice of law is too great. If we compare it to medicine, for example, in your second year, you are doing a clerkship, a clinical clerkship. You are in a hospital setting. You are interacting with patients. And one of the things that I think is important for law students to understand is that while the education component can be cool and dry and neat and tidy and clinical, the practice of law can be messy. You can have a difficult partner. You can have a challenging client. You can have a grumpy judge. You can have a technology failure. You could have a deadline, to be up against a tight deadline and be running a fever. That's life. That's messy. That's reality. And I think it's important that we have the opportunity to become acquainted with that dimension of it. It's very human. And I would also argue it's very exciting. Not everything is perfectly predictable, and you are going to get up some mornings and be prepared to argue a certain kind of a case or achieve a certain task at work, and something else happens which completely displaces that priority. So, yeah, I think that if there's one thing that we should be looking at law schools across the country is how do we abbreviate the distance between the study of law and the practice of law.
Do you have a suggestion?
I think we need to find ways to get students out into the practice, at least as an option. We might not be able to accommodate every single student, but for those who desire to do so, we need to be able to, build an ecosystem where students can become affiliated with law firms or NGOs or governments, but always working under the tutelage, the oversight of an experienced mentor lawyer, so that they can become involved in the day-to-day aspects of practicing law. And I think one thing that will help you do is, among other things, is decide whether you like it. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with learning whether you like something or don't like something. You might learn, for example, that I did a little stint in criminal law and decided I don't like that. Maybe you're going to love tax law. Maybe you're going to love family law. I don't know, but there's so many different opportunities out there.
Well, that's a great tie-in because I believe you didn't love tax law when you were in school, and yet you are a big person behind the HST in Ontario. It's one thing you're known for, and it was highly contentious, even among your advisors. So when your government proposed it in 2008, it had been accepted already in some Atlantic provinces, but it was still being debated throughout the country. And when people think about having to pay a new tax, they generally think they'll end up paying more. And you had a lot of work to do, as you said, convincing people that only the wealthiest Ontarians would see a net increase in taxes. This wasn't going to hurt everybody. So for someone who doesn't necessarily understand how a harmonized sales tax could affect the day-to-day lives of Ontarians, why did you do it? And question B is, do you like tax law more now?
I can tell you one thing. Let me answer the second part first. It's the easy one. I certainly developed a much greater appreciation for tax law. And one of the things that I was told by my advisors, Amie, was that to harmonize the sales taxes in Ontario. We had a goods and services tax and a provincial sales tax, two separate taxes. And they said that to harmonize those was the equivalent of touching the third rail of politics. That's the rail through which a powerful electric current is being conducted. Touch that one, you're done. You will never again be elected. So I had to kind of juxtapose that fear against my responsibility. We were in the middle of a terrible recession. We lost many thousands of jobs, and I needed to do more than just, as I saw it, just invest in short-term supports for Ontario businesses and Ontario families, but I also needed to build a new foundation for economic growth on the other side of this recession. And there were 140 other countries that had already done this. And the number one ask of Ontario businesses of me was, they said, hey, McGuinty, you gotta get with the game. We've got to have what they call a value-added tax globally. Here in Canada, it would be the HST, the harmonized sales tax. You've got to get that done. But it did mean, Amie, it would result, at least in the short term, in an increase in taxes. So we found a way to do it, and I'm here alive to tell the story. But I think the most important thing I learned through that experience is that conviction counts, because we won the next election after that. And one of the things I was able to convey to Ontarians is that we were not doing this as a government because we were trying to ingratiate ourselves with you. We're not trying to do this because it's convenient or it's easy, and it's not because it's going to make us more popular. Honestly think we need to do this to have a stronger economy. And with a stronger economy, we'll have more jobs. We'll be better positioned to fund our healthcare and good schools for our kids and environmental protections. So it was a difficult public policy, very challenging politically, but I'm pleased we're able to get that done.
Just in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, how did it not affect low-income people? How did it affect new capital investment for small, medium, and large businesses and different segments of the population?
Sure. Without getting into too much detail, effectively it meant a reduction on the cost of inputs for businesses. So it was going to lower business costs. And with that, theoretically, they could use those savings to make more investments and create more jobs and thereby help strengthen our economy. And that, in fact, had been the experience that we saw in those other jurisdictions I mentioned. But it's one thing to tell people that there are going to be good things happening from a tax hike, and another thing for them to believe you. People tend to think the worst when it comes to tax hikes. But we did some specific things to help protect vulnerable people. So as we introduced the HST, we also reduced taxes on our lowest income earners. So we had the lowest levels of taxation for our lowest income earners in the whole country. Then we also provided every family earning less than $160,000, I think it was, over the course of 2 years with 3 $1,000 checks, because we knew their household costs were going to go up as a result of this combination of new taxes. And then also we exempted the tax hike, Amie, from politically sensitive goods. Think diapers for children. Think children's car seats. Think home and auto insurance. Think a new home, the tax on that. So we exempted that to some extent. So we tried to be politically savvy, but in a way that did not compromise the intended purpose, which was to introduce a new, much more efficient and much more modern kind of tax.
Yeah, that's a hard sell. I know BC didn't have as much success as Ontario did at the time, but just comparing it to now, if you talk about corporate tax cuts, people, think about that differently than they maybe did back in 2008. Like, what's the sell now? Like, what do you do if you're the government now?
I think, today, if you're looking for specifically more revenue, I think the go-to right now would be for, given that there's been a growing income gap, the go-to for any progressive government, center-left government, would be to say we're going to increase taxes on the wealthiest income earners. And then beyond that, I do believe that there is some receptivity to additional cost if we can be reassured it will be invested in a sincere effort to unequivocally confront climate change. Am I prepared to pay for higher taxes for the benefit of my children and grandchildren to help build a safer world for them in their future? Yeah, I am. And I think a lot of people would be open to that.
Well, I've taken far too much of your time, but if you have just a little bit of advice for the next generation of lawyers, what would that be?
Maybe a couple of pieces of advice. One is give us your best. And I'm not just talking about your competency and your mastery of your craft. That's just the price of admission for the practice of law today. Give me your good character. Give me your integrity. Give me your unrelenting commitment to justice and fairness and equity and equality and opportunity for all of us. Give me that. And here's the other thing I would say to lawyers, because the fact of the matter is we occupy a position of privilege in our society. And with that privilege comes, I would argue, special responsibility. We've never needed more bridge builders than we do today. We've never needed more people who nurture, cherish, cultivate, celebrate trust than we do today. We are retreating into our individual tribes and reinforcing our biases, whether they are unconscious or not. And if we are going to do the best that we can for not only for ourselves, but for future generations, we're going to have to find a way to work together. We cannot possibly confront the next pandemic as individuals. We're going to have to do that together. We can't confront climate change alone. We're going to have to do that together. We can't confront the hundreds of thousands and soon to be millions of people who are going to be displaced as a result of climate change. These environmental refugees, we can't accommodate those people individually, but together around the world we can. So we need bridge builders. We need trust builders. We've got enough people who divide us and pit us against each other. We need some bridge builders. So there's a small challenge for the new generation of lawyers.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Amie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Tax Law Society podcast from the University of Ottawa. Today's show was produced and edited by me, Amie Watson, with research and graphic support from Adriana Conti and Arjun Gupta, and audio engineering support from Max Desmarais of Mix by Max. The Tax Law Society is committed to helping law students find jobs and build careers in tax law. If you want to learn more, check out our website at www.taxlawottawa.ca. Because you made it to the end of the interview, here are a few fun extras from our conversation.
U of O taught me how to think critically, to sift, to separate the wheat from the chaff, and to listen, which is a grossly underestimated skill in life, I would argue. So I did something a little bit different from many of my colleagues. In fact, all of my best friends at law school, I was married in second year. And one of the challenges that created was that I was taking a course called Criminal Justice Administration, which I think was on a Monday night between 6 and 9 p.m. And my professor was Edward Tushney, and he had a few simple ground rules. One of those was never miss a class. And if you were to miss a class, that would be grounds for failure. So I had to approach Edward Tushney and assess as to whether or not he had a heart, because I wanted to take a 2-day honeymoon. We took Sunday and Monday, married on Saturday, and he very kindly granted me permission to be away from school for my marriage. So another fond memory for me of University of Ottawa Law School. Very simple advice for those who seek to practice law in Canada, and for that matter, anywhere. Be a good lawyer. I'm not talking about your competence, that goes without saying. I'm talking about your integrity and your good character. Ottawa law taught me a lot of things, including how to lose. I sought election on the university senate. I wanted to be our law school representative, but sadly I lost. And one of the things I learned is that you shouldn't seek office unless you can say yes to a couple of things. One is, are you prepared to win and assume those responsibilities? And two, can you stand a loss? If you can't sustain a loss, then you shouldn't be running. But I learned how to lose, and that's an important lesson in life. When you make argument as a lawyer, and you'll be called upon to do so on a regular basis, it turns out conviction counts. And when it came time to prosecute the case for the harmonized sale tax in the Court of Public Opinion in Ontario, which was at least initially received as something that was very unpopular, we were able to convince Ontarians that it was the right thing for us to do. Conviction counted. I essentially made the case to Ontarians, I'm not doing this because this is easy, or because it's convenient, or because it's popular. I honestly believe we need to do this for the good of our economy. I learned that at law school.